Hi, it's Jerry Roberts back with another episode of Newsmakers Journal of the Plague Year. It is Wednesday, August 19th, and we are continuing our series of interviews with the candidates for the Santa Barbara Unified School District School Board. And this morning, I'm delighted to welcome Monie de Wit, a
Thank you.
photographer and community advocate. Who appears frequently at school board meetings. Monie, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
So
Delighted.
I said to one of your competitors the other day, you know, the pay is lousy, the hours are terrible, and somebody's always mad at you. So why in the world would you want to be on the school board?
Well, I guess you could say I'm a glutton for punishment, but actually the pay's not bad. I'm out of work currently. It's $100 a week. And my understanding is you can piggyback onto the benefit package. So,
That's true.
as a self-employed individual, that's kind of cushy in the line of COVID. So
What do you what's the most important specific thing that you would like to accomplish as a member of the school board?
well, I guess I would be wanting to accomplish a change in our culture around literacy in that model, because I think it impacts the achievement gap, and it also is responsible for the disparity. And then I would want to, I don't think I can change that without changing communication. I think it's gotten a little political, and I actually think I can be a unifying force, and I can understand a lot of different viewpoints, and I think I can bring people around to focus on the unmet needs of people, students who are wounded and not getting the access and the education in the way that they succeed. And this is happening all around the country, so it's not just our district, but it's not going to go away without teacher training, the science of reading, and I recommend a ThickMet report. That's like an overall audit. And that is something like the state comes in and assesses. They talk to parents, they do like a great survey, and then they bring it back to you. And typically it's a great starting point for everybody to kind of start over and say, this is what we need to work on.
So the culture of literacy is really what the focus of your message is about.
Yes, but the ThickMet report would take a broad, wide lens to everything, not just my personal view does stress literacy, because I think it's a human right, but the ThickMet report will go bigger. It'll go in the numbers. It'll look at, why we're spending 2.6 on the armory versus the needs. It'll look at LCAP. Even we've asked for some figures for some of the programs that we support, but they passed without a bottom line. And I had to ask a Freedom of Information Act like 2 months ago, and still nobody can tell me how much this is costing or if it's coming out of LCAP, which is this unique spot for kids of high needs that generate more money. And that money is supposed to go directly to them in the most effective way. But our district, and many districts do this, they use that money district-wide. And I know this because there's a group called Public Advocates, and they actually wrote the district. They did not get a response, sadly, and they showed this analysis and explained that this is it feeds into the disparity, because that's like a $13 million budget. And so maybe we could get rid of balanced literacy, whole language, and implement science of reading for that group. Or, we could get creative and talk about it, but so we have to watch the monies that it gets in the classroom.
All right. So as a political matter, in terms of the campaign, there are 8 candidates for 3 seats, and there are 3 quote unquote incumbents who are seeking new terms who got their seats because nobody else signed up to run 4 years ago. What grade do you give the board over the last several years about how well or not well they're doing in representing the interests of the parents and the community and the students?
Well, I would hate to say it, but I would have to look at the data, which would be the CAP scores for the whole district. And there is a line, and there's these groups that are underneath the line and they're failing. So I would say we've failed those groups. And and our former superintendent used to like to say that he celebrated the success of the Asians and whites, so maybe he succeeded there, but from my point of view, we're failing. And unwittingly so. I think they've tried to do some things, but under Matsuoko, he basically had his own bosses, and it was a very top-down situation, and parents would get no response. I mean, I'm running partially because there's no reciprocity.
Yeah.
So it's difficult to make impact.
So do you feel like the three incumbents just kind of went along with what the former superintendent was saying? Do you think anybody?
Yes, he was incredibly
him?
intimidating. The culture before him, there was a little bit more collaboration. We had Sherry Ray as an advocate who was a sort of a liaison between the embarrassing cases that we wouldn't have to shame the district that these exist. You know, we just work on focusing on the kids. But under the most recent former superintendent, he threw her under the bus. She was subsidized by an outside donor, and she was doing good work. So that was a big thing. Then the resource center got put in the basement. You can only go there by appointment. That was the community's expression of Joan Esposito's work. Like Orfila went into that, Michael Tobes, everybody, and his brother, and it was bilingual. So that, and we had staffing there for it. So that was something really Sherry Ray and the Esposito's credit, but so that was gone. So we could see, oh, open alternative. We begged for that. That was like middle school is to private schools, open alternative was to the district. Like everybody who had learning issues would go there because they taught in a slightly different way. That, you know, that also got shut down. And so I would have to say that we need a higher priority on literacy and a different culture. The culture focused on it.
All right, well, let's talk about the test scores, which show 56% of students are proficient in English language, grade level proficient, and only 45% in math. And when we hear these reports from the cabinet, you know, they point to, well, we're making a little bit of progress here, a little bit of progress there. But as I understand what you're saying, there needs to be something more, a more fundamental approach, a more dramatic change. What would you do to bump those test scores?
Okay, we need to come at it from a different understanding. And the difference in the understanding, I think, that the board does sometimes talk about incremental change or pockets of hope, but that's not going to cut it because, like you say, the averages that you're calling out, but those aren't the lowest of the low. You got to go to students with, and I prefer we call them differences and disabilities. You got to next look at the English language learners and then the foster youth. And those are way behind. And in our district, the current culture, before you can get an IEP, individual education plan, which has a little bit of backing for you, you have to, they wait to fail. You have to be in the bottom 25%. And even on our district website right now, there's 13 things that will qualify you. The word dyslexia isn't even on it. And if you go to the guidelines for AB 1369, which does help support, but the Teachers Union fought to become into law, that says use dyslexia and get out there early, K through 3, get structured literacy, so kick out this one approach that's killing everybody, and make sure you get good teacher training, and you will raise those scores. I think Franklin's doing an amazing job on a shoestring, you know, and I think we can find workarounds and look at each individual site, but I think they're looking at something else, and they're kind of misunderstanding the problem.
Yeah. So how do you account for it? Is it a fundamental sort of difference in theoretical in how you approach these learning issues? And exactly. So how would you define what that is?
Well, I would actually say you can look at the brains of dyslexic because they've taken MRIs, and the certain area which matches the sound to a letter is not as active as it is in other brains. However, many dyslexics have heightened spatial visual awareness, but so there's a neurological difference. However, we also know that the brain is very, there's a lot of plasticity. Like if somebody who doesn't know how to read when they're like in their 50s learns how to read and you compare those MRIs, there's change in the brain. So the thing that we're really trying to say is there's a whole bunch of brains out there, 20% of them, that aren't going to be able to do this the way you keep expecting them to. So the system needs to adjust. And the adjustment is simple. And I got it organically, actually. I didn't know I was dyslexic until I did a PSA for Joan Esposito's place with the Ad Club. But the nuns and people like that, they had a lot of phonics. So phonemic awareness. So that's first attaching the single sounds. And then they build in a sequential way to the whole word. And then to a phrase. And then to a sentence. And it's very individual. You probably notice with your grandkids, some pick it up, some don't. Rhyming helps. But it takes a very explicit, typically one-on-one is great or something close to that. And it needs to be done early. Because if none of this happens by the end of the 3rd grade, they drop out and then you've got the school to prison pipeline.
All right, yeah, I want to get into that. So how does all this, or how would this, or does this impact the achievement gap?
Yes, completely. Because if you can, and mental health, I can tell you, because if you don't know how to read, you're either hiding it, or especially if you're in the Latino community, and maybe your parents just think you're a little slower, dumber. I mean, people don't really get it. It's so misunderstood. I get it because it happened to me and my younger son. And when I was intervening for him, I learned so much. I now study at Orton Gillingham and stuff you'd never believe I would do. So we need to get rid of the whole language approach. And that would immediately get kids up to speed. It would help with self-esteem. And then all the other grades would improve, you know, because math would improve, a lot of those, and the processing would get faster. And we also need our families to support. You know, these kids need to go to bed early. They need to be reinforced with games. They need a good diet. They need a quiet space. And, you know, we go through each family situation, or schools like Franklin give the kids after school stuff. And the kids who are a little behind get attention and the others get enrichment. And enrichment is another piece I don't want to leave out because it's the most important. So these kids struggle with literacy. They have feeling like they're not enough and that they're probably not going to make it. That's what they hear. If they don't develop their strengths early on, then they're going to go probably to acting out. And so those strengths can be anything, and a musical instrument. That's great for both sides of the brain. But we need to be finding their gift, finding what they're excited about. And even as a community, we can build mentorship programs, because that's how these kids project-based. That's the goods. We can turn it around.
All right. Let me switch topics a little bit, because obviously, even as we talk about this, pandemic is just, nobody's in school. So, the board had discussed a range of options: distance learning, face-to-face, hybrid. But then the governor, swooped in and said, because you're on the watch list, it all has to be distance learning. So as a policy matter, do you think that state government should have that power, or should that decision have been left to the local districts?
Well, personally, I prefer it left to the local district, because I trust that in many ways it's nuanced. We have Lompoc increasing our numbers, like we have hot spots. And I think if our community saw people just routinely wearing masks, and I think that's been amped up recently. So, I think to keep it in the local community is wise. We want what's best for our kids.
Yeah. So what would be your criteria for feeling that it was safe to send teachers and students back into the classroom? There have been cases, for example, the University of North Carolina, where they said open it up, and almost immediately, had 130 cases, had to shut it down. How do you think that process ought to work?
Well, I know this sounds weird, but again, this is sort of cultural. I was once a long time ago in Japan where they wear masks. It's not a big deal. And I would feel very confident if I walked down the street, no matter where I walked, and people were wearing their masks. We just have to do it, because that's the way to nip this thing in the bud. And that, if I clearly saw that, like remarkably just went in random places and saw that high level of care among our fellow citizens, I would feel safe. I would feel safe as a parent and a teacher. And then I would do all the other buffer stuff, that.
Well, yeah, I mean, do you think that if we were going to, reopen the classrooms, we would need testing for every student, for every kid?
I believe Montecito Union at one point had a good model, and that, there are thermometers and things that you can put right up. It's not invasive. So I would look for practices that we can just check, if you have a temperature. And also I would be using the outdoor spaces, and looking at each site. I think we should be able to do this outside until we feel that we have enough confidence to go inside.
Okay. All right. And then, so I know it's early, it's only the second day of school, but how do you think that the district and the new superintendent have done in preparing for distance learning, as school reopens, as opposed to the spring where it was really kind of I think everybody agrees it was kind of a mess. Do you think there have been advances? Do you think there's better planning now?
I haven't really been on the inside of that. I do know my youngest son, he's a junior, and his school closed down. So he's now actually going to middle college, which is part of the district. And I know they had glitches with their passcodes and their systems. And I know that there's still issues around hotspots to some of the student groups. But, I think they're doing their best. And I think we should nitpick on everything and give them some support. It's a difficult situation.
Sure. Okay. Now, one of the big issues at the board in recent years, have been questions around equity, and fair education has been one group that feels like the emphasis in that direction has taken away from more traditional learning, literacy, and so on. How do you feel about that? What do you think of the emphasis that the previous administration, and it looks like it's going to carry on now, has been? How would you assess that overall?
Well, I think, the idea of, that fair ed likes a more traditional approach probably points to those test scores. And I think that can't be ignored and addressed like we talked about. I think implicit bias training is very important. I personally would like to see that go to someone of color or Latinx educator here locally, so we can hear their local experience, and we can also fund a local person who should be more funded, because traditionally their income levels are down, rather than what I see as a contract going to one affluent white male who's interpreting an experience. See, even at TAC where I went.
Well, you're talking about just communities now.
Yeah, I think it would be better let's mix it up, and it's too expensive. But I like implicit bias. I think diversity enriches. I mean, my family's from Holland. I grew up speaking Dutch. We had Christmas on St. Nicholas Day, different cultures. And I feel like it's something you take with you. It enriches you.
So if I just want to be clear, so you are very supportive of the idea of implicit bias training. That's
yes.
Something we ought to do. Yes. But in terms of where the resources have been directed, you feel that that's not been a good investment because it's too much, because there's not transparency? Why?
Well, a couple reasons. For one, there was no competition. And I think those big contracts are too complicated. They leave out people who don't have that big of a setup. Like he's in Malibu, Central Coast. He's got like an infrastructure. I would rather hear from people, stay local and express it locally. And, but I do think it's an important thing for us to have. The other thing is that the violence has gone up. And I think that Fair Ed and JC have been adversarial when, in a way, I think they could have worked together had they been more open. And I've gone to talk to him about neurodiversity, because a lot of the people he's helping have this overlay that they're not succeeding in school. But he didn't want to hear about it. So I just think
now, who is he? Who is he? That
Mr. Schwartz. When I first met him, I was like, hey, you know what? We've got a lot of overlap, and I want you to know about this, because this affects. So the whole equity thing and achievement thing, we just have a different view, and I don't think that cultural proficiency is never going to make up for decoding, but I think it belongs in the social part, social emotional feelings of belonging. Yes, and we need to hear from other stories than just the Eurocentric, and I'm all for that, but don't confuse that.
You support what the board has done in terms of ethnic studies and making that a requirement. You think that's a good idea?
I think making ethnic studies is probably a good idea to make it a requirement. In a way, I hedged on making it a requirement only because I think we could weave it right into our history so that people could still have, I think, 2 other electives. But yeah, I think it belongs. Those stories need to be told. We've had one-sided. And yeah, I think it would be a move forward and make the whole community feel included, you know?
Yeah.
Where now they don't.
All right, let's talk about finances a little bit, because there have been several controversies about the budget. Obviously, a big deficit in the food program, big cost overruns on the stadium, Peabody Stadium. The district backed a bond issue to buy the armory, which is vacant. What's your assessment of how the board has managed or its oversight in terms of the financial performance of the district?
Well, again, I would say, you know, the priority isn't on the unmet needs of the students. It's on real estate deals and whatever else. Like, that armory needs to go. We are not a realtor, and our scores are in the suck zone. So what are we doing with that lead-ridden monstrosity? And he's so proud of it. We could sell it to the police. We could sell it to anybody, but we got to unload it, maybe make some money. And, you know, then we could get these scores up. And we could get the class sizes smaller. We could even pay the teachers more. And yeah, don't even get me started on that baseball field. 500 less seats. It started out as 12 million, $40 million. And what they did to Figueroa Street is kind of really cuts those people's views. But
yeah,
so yeah.
As a practical matter, I think there's a dynamic that's true in every local school board, which is, you know, you have elected, sometimes appointed, but in our case, elected board members whose job is to kind of oversee the big picture, and then you have the superintendent. And the dynamic between them seems to have been that the superintendent, you know, they were kind of just going along with whatever you said, I think with some exceptions.
Yes, irresponsibly so here and there.
So how would you see your job in terms of what the superintendent is putting on the agenda, what they're promoting? How would you be able to manage that relationship?
Well, I think having a new superintendent is great, because the former one did things like didn't do mandatory reporting when we had the Bacchanal at the Matt Academy. And then it came out that he actually wasn't completely forthcoming around the Ed Barron's debacle. And so, you know, each thing led to another. So I don't think we're going to have a replay of that. You know, Ms. Maldonado seems refreshing, and, you know, so the style will have changed. But we have to watch the monies, and we have to do better with parent engagement. Many people do not get responses, and we don't like where the money's going sometimes, you know, like we're 10 million in the hole right now, and they just wrote $1 million contract, and it's just concerning, you know?
Yeah. Do you, one of the things that you wrote about, you had an op-ed published in the Independent, was the high cost of getting into the race, of being able to run. To talk about that a little bit.
I'll tell you, it wasn't pretty, but you know, my team here, and I don't have a publicist, and I know I must be naive, but I love journalists, but I didn't think I needed all that, you know? And that's the thing, we are really creating a barrier. That fee is for just writing 200 words, which, trust me, isn't easy, you know? And if you're not in it with the
pandemic, much was the fee?
5,302 for that. If you go over, it's 10,000.
To get a statement in the voter handbook.
Yeah, and I used to do press checking overseas. It makes no difference if you buy a page or a half a page. There's no $5,000 fee for a bunch of black ink. It just doesn't work. So something's weird. And I asked several people at the election office, and they all said, well, that decision was made by the current board. And now my beef is the current board, who's actually running against me, is using this position that they didn't get from the voters. They were doing public service, but they're not there by any representation, and they're making more hurdles for other people to get through. Me personally, I can make it, but you know, it's a lot. And then, you know, you have to do other expenses. So I am thinking we need to go to a 7-person board. We need to subsidize an entire position so that that person doesn't have to work a second or third job, and automatically, you know, maybe we get a pool of little letters they write, an interview, and whoever we all pick, they're in, and then a student. Because what's happening now is we're getting like,
So a staff person connected directly to the board is what you're saying.
no, a parent of one of these high-risk students who's never in a million years going to run through the hoops that are required. Because I actually tried to get 3 of them to do it, and they're like, no way, miss, no way.
Okay. All right, Monie, we got to wrap up, but if people want to know more about your campaign, how do they connect with you? Do you have a website?
Yes, I do. It's on construction maybe for the next day, but it's literacyAhumanright.com. So just forget about the word is. So literacyAhumanright.com.
LiteracyAhumanright.com.
Yes.
Okay. And they'll be able to find
my email and everything, and more information about me, and they can contact me and give me their opinions about what they'd like to see different.
all right. Final
And
word.
thank you,
Why should people vote for you?
Because it's a human rights issue, you know? And if they don't, we're going to have the school to prison pipeline is bigger. And that's a real, watch Richard Ross, that photographer, go watch his work and you'll be moved and you'll want to end the education system and the justice system. It's ugly.
Okay.
But thank you.
Monie de Wit, thank you so much for your
Thank
time.
you, Jerry.
Good luck on your campaign.
Yay, Jerry Roberts rocks.